Hi everyone, I'm Steve Carter. I'm one of the co-founders of the Satori Partnership, and today I'm going to talk all things data with the industry's number one data guru, friend of mine and colleague and co-founder of the Satori Partnership, Tracey O'Neill. Hi Tracey, good morning.
Hi, hi, Steve. Thanks very much for that lovely intro. When Steve and I have conversations around data, we're very much kindred spirits, and it's a really interesting topic, which I find really interesting. So I think Steve has into finding out about why data is so interesting to me and why it should be so interesting to other people as well.
Yeah, and as a moment of self-reflection, right? So as you know, Tracey, detail's not my best friend, and I'm very focused on the big concepts, the big ideas, and one of the things I've learned about this is that I get the romance and the idea of AI and its impact on the sector and digital transformation and all things in that area and how do we evolve the industry. That's where I'm at most of the time. But then I realize it's all about data. So
Yeah.
there's no point really in having that sort of level of self-thought unless we get data sorted out. So I've become super curious and actually very committed and interested to data. And I guess that's where I really wanted to start this conversation because, although it's a cheesy analogy, when I talk to owners, founders, executives, leaders of recruitment companies, and they tell me about the shopping list of tools they want to buy with AI and how it's going to revolutionize their business. The minute I mention data, they sort of glaze over like, oh, please don't bore me to death. But actually, it is a bit like going out to buy a Ferrari, but you don't have a driver's license. There is
Yeah.
absolutely no point in acquiring technology without the data and all the things within that data set. Now, is that correct or is that too simplistic?
No, I think it's right. And to keep on your cheesy analogy, and again, we've heard it so many times. Data, you're a Ferrari. Like, you can't run a business without data of some description. And I think why people glaze over is that they believe that data is about coding and email addresses and the data hygiene aspect of things. And part of it is that, but that's not all that it's about. So, and I think privacy regulations, data protection, although that has always been around as well, I think that has given the whole data thing a bad rap in the past few years as well, because people are scared of it. They don't really know what to do. So they sort of ignore it. They put it in the corner and we'll come back to that. And they're seeing it, both owners, recruitment business owners, and recruiters feel that it's an admin task, and there's so much more to data because actually I didn't introduce myself when we started there, but I'm a recruiter by trade. So I started in recruitment in 2000 and was always, a temps and contracts recruiter. And that was all about data. Like, it's all about data, margins, temps out, runners, how many hours, whether you like it or not, we think about data. And that is also a type of data that we're talking about and looking at all day, every day. So, so you've got data hygiene, you've got data privacy, you've got margins and so on, financial piece of it. You've got all of the commercial data that we want to look at, in terms of your customers, what are they spending with you? And then you've got your other side of it, which again, when I go into businesses and start talking to people about data, they think I'm talking dashboards and KPIs and CVs out and ratios, again, which is also part of it. So there's a lot of different strands to this whole conversation around data, and I think some of it is a bit more interesting to owners than others. So maybe we can pick that apart over the next 20 minutes, half an hour.
Yeah, that's fine. And I want to get back to some of the structural aspects of that data and
Absolutely.
some of the key issues. But I wanted to sort of share a story from yesterday, which I think illustrates the point you're making. Met with a company that are using AI or adopting AI in various parts of the business, and their optimism is this is going to solve problems, make them more efficient, make them more money. And they've overlaid AI onto kind of hybrid versions of existing processes. Anyway, my first meeting with them, I was like, this makes no sense. And so I got some data. and we went through the data yesterday in a meeting, and where they spend a huge proportion of their time generates them less than 5% of their revenue. But
Yeah.
where they spend less time, where they should be focused, they could make another 30 or 40% revenue for no more effort, but everybody's looking
Yeah.
in the wrong place. And the data immediately made that evident yesterday on a screen. And it wasn't
Yeah.
complex analysis. It was just simply the numbers don't lie. What you
Yeah.
think is happening is not happening. And so what they've been doing is applying an AI adoption strategy onto a bad set of data or a bad process, and now they're going to get a really sexy bad outcome. They're not going to
Yeah.
get a better
Yeah.
outcome. Is that sort of the stuff that you see, or is that typical?
Definitely, because it's just, a bad process is a bad process. AI and automation just supercharge a bad process in the wrong direction. And again, this is something for many years of what we need to look at. Data, people, process, and technology, all four need to be in sync so that you're going in the right direction. Because if one is forgotten about, or one takes precedent over the other, so back to your tools and technology analogy, if we're putting all of our time and effort and money into tools and technology, but we've neglected the data in terms of the data quality, we have neglected the process, which you've just spoken about, and we've neglected the people who culturally maybe have fatigue of having 3 systems migrations in the past 24 months, and are not interested in using the new tech. Then you have a problem. Have to be going in the right direction. And there's a lot of it as well, and this actually hits all four. So in a similar scenario that I had recently, a client wanted to basically, was looking at new AI tools. And when we went and looked at, so before he went to purchase the new technology, we said, look, just stop a minute. Let us have a look at how you're doing things currently. Let's talk to the people. Let's have a look at the data. Let's see what you're doing right now. And again, a bit like that, it's, when we looked at it, the data wasn't even in the systems. People were writing in their notebooks still, and they were on Excel spreadsheets. So
Right.
there's no AI that's going to reach into your notebook or onto your whiteboard and do something fancy with it. It has to be in a system somewhere. Now, am I old school? Do I still have a notebook on my desk? Yes, I do. Are there whiteboards all around the place? Yes, there are. But you have to, like you say, figure out which pieces of the process are appropriate for each of the methods of working.
Right. And
So, yeah.
and 100%, like, and again, their case yesterday was really interesting because they had a bad process, and as you said, it supercharged it. So now they've got AI doing the front end of that aspect. It's created triple the workload 2 steps down the line. And they were trying to solve the problem of how do they deal with triple the workload, which is effectively redundant because they shouldn't have done it in the first place. So the AI is way more efficient at one step, but it made step 3 10 times worse, right? And then they were struggling with that. Do we have to hire people? What do we do? And it's like, stop doing step 1, right? Because it was just amplifying the issue because they didn't understand the data. They didn't understand where their revenue was coming from. They'd never looked, right? And I just think that's why data applies to every recruitment business. And again, I wouldn't view on this, but there's a lot of talk about AI enabling super billers, one man, one woman recruitment companies billing a lot of fees because AI is doing all the jobs. It strikes me as the kind of lost here is that small to mid-sized recruitment company that don't have resources internally that like are focused on data and technology, and they're kind of maybe owner operated or a leadership team that's very sales focused. They don't think this data thing's for them, maybe, but actually my advice would be that's exactly the people, because you can supercharge your business way beyond the scale of the humans if you allow your humans to do all the meaningful stuff and get the data driving the tech. I mean, is that the sweet spot, do you think, in the industry, or is it everybody?
So I think it's not, and back to the previous point, I don't think any of this is one size fits all. I think it very much comes down to how you do business, but you need to figure out how you do business before you look at any tools, technology, new people, or change your process. But to your point, I think smaller businesses rely on all businesses, I should say, on relationships and people, and reputation. I think what the smaller businesses fear is that the personal touch is going to be lost. But I think where automation and AI and technology can help is that it works at the top of the funnel. Your relationships are still your relationships, and that those are still the important piece. But your AI, yeah. So all of those relationships are still there. But if I'm a a one person agency, all of that resourcing, all of that screening, all of that paper pushing and checking, and compliance, for example, if you're that way inclined in terms of what the people that you're recruiting, all of that can be done by AI or automation or tech, and that leaves you to spend more time with your clients and more time with your candidates and your applicants, and that's where you want to be. But I don't think that's a small agency versus large agency question. That's where we all want to be. We all want to be spending more time talking to the people and doing the really interesting work.
So let me just drill down on that a bit, because I think people get data and tech and the human side of recruitment a bit sort of jumbled up. One of the things that I've worked with you on several times, and I think always amazes me, is when you drill into the client analysis, you look at the data around clients, and more often than not, you point out to clients that who they think is their best client is not their best client. Can you elaborate a bit on that, about the how you point that out, how you get people focused, what it is that makes that so material?
This is where I get the attention of the business owners, and the CEOs and the COOs. And I don't just work within recruitment, I work across other industries as well. But I always get people's attention when I start talking to them about the commercial side of their data and their sales. So if we look in a recruitment scenario, when I walk into a business, pretty much every company can tell me, what net fee income they made last year. And they can probably tell me who their top 5 billers are. And they can probably tell me who the top 5 clients are in terms of who has spent the most with them in the past 12 months. What they don't necessarily tell me is, are those 5 clients the same 5 clients that spent the most money with them last year and the year before? So there are a couple of kind of key pieces of analysis, fairly straightforward analysis that I would work through with people when I speak to them. So one is around that churn, so lapsed clients. So we might say, show me your last 4 years of client spend. Who were the people that were spending with you, as I said, in 21, 22, who dropped off in 22, 23, and have come back on again, or who has dropped off completely and has never returned. When we dig into it, we can always see a pattern, because there's always a story behind the numbers. So typically they can say to me, yeah, that company closed, fine, that, or they've moved geography, or they've done whatever, they don't spend with us anymore. But sometimes we see really interesting patterns, like, well, that company spent with us a lot. Their key person moved to another organization, and we didn't have a relationship with anybody else within the company. So it died, it fell off. Or the other one that's quite common is, yes, well, one of our key performers, one of our key consultants had the relationship with that company, and they've gone to the company down the road and taken all that business with them. And sometimes it is a bit of a light bulb moment where people kind of go, yeah, actually, we didn't even realize we'd missed that. We didn't even realize, because if you're in a larger company, recruiters, and correct me if I'm wrong, but many of the recruiters that I know are quite transactional. So it's what's dropped into my inbox today, what jobs am I filling now, who's applied today. I mightn't even look back to see who's applied, 3 months ago that would be suitable for that job. But so by in the same way, people don't really look back to see who they've done business with before. So that's number one. That's the churn. Number two is around revenue concentration. And again, I see this all the time. It's around, excuse me, it's around who are, the top 5 clients that are spending money with us. How many other, is there a long tail of other clients that, have spent ones and twos and so on with us over the past while? Are we getting 80% of our client spend from 20% of our customers? If so, are there other customers within our, dormant customer database that have a similar profile? So if it turns out that we're all of the money is being spent with us by FMCG companies, can I go and find more FMCG companies that I'm not doing business with, either within my own CRM or out in the market? Can I go and grab more share because FMCG companies are really interested in what we're doing with our, I don't know, engineers? That's who we're placing with most. So you want to look at, and that's a risk. We want to say, if that company, if one or two of your top 5 companies that are spending with you, for whatever reason, bit the dust, is that taking 20% of your revenue with it? Are we, and I know this is I'm going to let you jump in here again, Steve, because this is where your big things about, are we paying everybody commission, for the same roles? If I'm just somebody who's filling roles with the same 3 companies all the time,
Yeah.
is that right or wrong? I'm going to take a drink of water. You can take up from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to add on to that, there's a few things there. One is that, again, you and I have sat down and done this work with clients, or you've just been sharing outputs with me, the behavioural aspect of this too, the data is also showing you the behaviour of a client, i.e., it's a more frictionless process with one company versus another, in terms of your control over that relationship, your trust in that relationship, the speed at which they move, the lack of discounting. There are lots of factors that when you drill into that, it starts saying that your 10th biggest client is your best client. How do you make them even better? And I think that's, absolutely one of the big insights. I think the other point from what you said is that when you think about this as sort of a hub and spoke concept, if the hub is the data, in what you were just saying, what you illustrated is there's an automatic connection with, say, marketing. How does marketing warm up customers? How does marketing warm up and originate candidates and manage that workflow? Driven by what the data is saying, not by what someone at a desk thinks is happening. It's also, the data is the hub connecting to finance, and everything from process to invoicing to timesheet management to payroll. The data is looking at that. The data is also connecting up with sales, saying, okay, where are you spending your time? What are you spending your time on? And I'll come back to that commission point related to that. It's connecting with operations. So if you can imagine, if it was the bridge of the Starship Enterprise was data, and you ran your business from the center of the hub, every other resource you've got in the business, whether it be digital or human, is just more effective. And back to your point about commission, one of my greatest frustrations is, and if anyone has ever spoken to me before knows they've had to suffer me talking about this, is when I walk into a recruitment business and I watch highly skilled communicators, very capable people that want to build relationships with clients. And that's the reason they got into recruitment, spending their time chained to a screen, doing things they don't want to be doing, they're not very good at, and they're not very effective in terms of ROI from an owner, founder, director of a recruitment company. So there has to be a different way of rewarding people. Similarly, you've got multiple people doing the same thing at the same time, all of whom probably haven't calibrated that against any validation of data to say that's a good thing to be spending your time on. And so the company's paying out not just commissions, it's paying out base salaries for people to be doing things. Like when I started in recruitment, I think my first manager was Noah. That's how old I am. But the issue there was, basically pick a company A to E. Use the alphabet, use a geography, use an industry. You don't have to do that anymore. But yet recruitment companies still get run the same way, right? Do BD. Well, no, the data should be able to say these are clients that have engaged with us on multiple occasions, whether they spent or didn't spend, whether they liked our content or didn't like our content, whether you've got a relationship with them or not got a relationship with an individual, whether they are in our wheelhouse in terms of the candidates we've got available, call them or plug them into some other sort of further engagement. And therefore, consultants should be able to spend all their time on activities because the data is telling them to do that. And the management are spending their time looking at the data and directing the traffic in the business. There should just be a massive return on investment for no extra cost. No need to hire more consultants. They're hard to get anyway, and no guarantee of success. This is before you need AI. Don't even worry about AI. If people focus on the data and get that right and manage the business according to what the evidence says, then AI is the cherry on top. It's not. It's not the thing that's making the difference. It's just a better way to do things. So everything you said is true.
And what's really interesting is a lot of CRMs, market leading CRMs, any CRMs at the moment, have a lot of functionality that people don't even realize that's in there. And my one speak to your CRM provider and find out what is all the functionality that it has that you're not using. What have they released in the past 6 months? They're all, really forward thinking. They all have roadmaps. So, there is no point in migrating and still using it the way it was presented to you 4 years ago, because something really interesting that I see a lot. So comes back, marketing piece and cold calling piece. There is no need, in my opinion, no need to cold call anybody anymore. When you do a search, so you are sent off and you have to do a BD bash morning and you go and, do your search for your contacts. Oftentimes I'll say to people, do you realize that in the background, marketing have been sending out communications and branding emails and so on, and the engagement and activity of your contacts with that material, you can see in your search. Now, some CRMs have it, some don't. Most do. And when I say to them, do you realize that these are all the contacts that you have, and these top 100 have all opened and clicked and read content from this organization in the past 2 weeks? It blows their mind. And one of my big bugbears is that sales and marketing are not connected. Marketing do great work over here, sales do great work over here, and they don't talk to each other. Again, this is not a new problem, but this is where if it's all connected and we're thinking about the whole process together, marketing, again, top of funnel, they're warming up, contacts, candidates, and so on. And then you're literally, as you would also say, Steve, putting the ball in the back of the net. They're getting to a point where, you just need to put the right job in front of them, put the right candidate in front of them and so on. And they already know you, they know your brand, they know potentially you. And it's not a cold call. People will be much more likely to lift the phone or respond to an email if they know you.
Yeah, because nobody likes making cold calls and nobody wants to receive one. So why?
No. And those days are gone. People, to be honest, does anybody really even actually call anybody anymore?
No,
unlikely.
Now it's a yeah, correct. And I think, but when you go and, I want to move forward and talk a bit about all the aggregation of this data, right? But again, when I speak to owners, founders, leaders a lot, they are still their metrics to operate the business by haven't changed. So some agencies still measure call times. They still measure call volumes. They still measure how many people you met this week. Guess what? If they actually look at the data and break that down and apply, it made no damn difference, right? Because if they use the data properly, it doesn't matter if the person made 5 calls or 55 calls, because every call they made was relevant. Every call they made was warm. Every call they made was to someone who wanted to have a chat, because they can find that out. And it's their CRM has functionality to do that, but also some of the tools that are available out there can point that out. But if you haven't got any of those things, then step back from the edge and think about what's going on. Not you, but the clients, because the agencies. Because when I go into agencies and they have screens playing Rocky music, saying Freddie's made 25 calls this morning, I'm like, so what? What the hell, right? Stop doing that. Apart from the fact it's bad karma playing Rocky music in the office in 2026. But it doesn't matter. And actually, if I took the same person that made 25 calls and looked at their data and looked at what they were doing, I bet you they could have made 15, 10, 5 calls and made 10 times more money. So, there is the other end of this data, and that is they have an adjusted process and they have an adjusted analytics and measurement and the standards by which they run an agency on a very informed basis. And I would urge recruitment agency owners, leaders, managers to look at what you're measuring, because you're measuring the wrong stuff, and that's leading your people to do the wrong stuff.
Yeah, and measure it in context, because I had a situation not very long ago where I went into an office and I was looking at, part of what I was doing was looking at KPIs, and we were doing trends. So I was building out trend dashboards and so on. One of the things that I don't like to do is build trend dashboards for leadership teams who never look at them, and it's just a vanity thing, that they're looking at the trends. But again, and this comes back to a piece about data literacy and data culture. If you have dashboards and trends as a leader, manager, team leader, you need to know what you're looking at and what you're looking for. So my situation was that I had a girl. She was brilliant. She was really enthusiastic, great person. Was in the business maybe 8 months or so, and she was so willing and was such a hard worker, but she wasn't making any money. And for whatever reason, her manager or team leader had just missed the fact that when I looked at her data, she was making all the candidate calls, speaking to everybody, going through every application, but she wasn't sending any CVs. And when we looked at it, she kept saying to me, but I'm working really hard. And she was, in the sense of all of those volumes of calls. So her KPIs were saying, she's making 200 calls a week to candidates, and the candidates loved her. But she wasn't getting anybody any jobs because she wasn't actually confident enough to send the CVs to the jobs that were there. So she was actually nearly trying to go too in depth around, the CVs. And, it literally just took her team leader to come along and say, right, it's not that we want to, we don't want to send it, rubbish out to these clients, but you have to consult, you have to send, and then either get a hit or a miss. And if you get a miss, then you have to speak to the client and say, well, why was it a miss? And then you go back and do the consulting piece of your job. And it was it sounds so simple. It was just such a small little piece, and then everything unlocked for her, because she had been speaking to all the candidates all loved her. So when she was able to go back to them and say, actually, I do have a job, quicker. So so I think my point being, data literacy, not dashboards for the sake of dashboards, not measuring things for the sake of measuring them, looking at everything in context.
Yeah, I think if you adopt a data-centric approach as a leader and you invest that knowledge in your team, they will become productive faster if they're new. They'll become more productive as a fee earner in the business. They'll just like the job better, because there's loads of stuff recruiters hate doing, and it's a big part of their job. And I guess the data says stop doing that stuff, do the meaningful stuff. And most people, most recruiters will jump up and down with joy that they don't have to do some of the terrible parts of the job because they didn't sign up for that anyway. And, again, last time I looked, unless something's changed, I've never seen the person who made the most phone calls go on the Dubai trip, right? Or I've never seen a person who, spent the most time on the phone go to the posh lunch. Like, it's all about fees, about outcomes. So,
Yeah.
I think you're right. I also wanted to just move slightly on the same area. So, you and I met with a good partner and someone we like and know yesterday, and they've come up with some great stuff, and they built this. They've now built this sort of data dashboard that tells you where all the money is that you're not making. Now, my immediate takeaway was that's beyond human comprehension or beyond a human's ability to act on it. It's so big, in fact, what I'll do is I won't do anything because I don't know where to start. It's just big. Now, this data is so insightful. It's saying, here's 900 leads. Well, what am I going to do with that? I don't know. I'll just ignore it. I mean, what's your view on this aggregation piece where the AI and the technology is so good at fishing out the information? How do we action it versus, well, that's very interesting, but I don't have the capacity to deal with it?
Yeah. So I think staying as close to the money as possible is number one. Use your AI and automation to warm everything up to the point that, you're literally putting the ball in the back of the net. World Cup analogy maybe is appropriate at the moment. But I think for me, again, a lot of it actually, I'm going to take a slightly different spin maybe on this than a lot of it actually comes down to segmentation and comes down to the customer. You might know, again, this might say there's 900 companies, 900, I don't know, companies that are hiring for this particular type of role type, and you don't have all those jobs on. So then we need to say, right, are they in a geography that we serve? Are they in an industry that we serve? Do we have a pipeline of candidates in that area? So it's really all about, again, back down to segmentation and trying to
pick up on segmentation. The Wi-Fi there, you're perfect now, but you go a bit pixelated every now and then.
Which is so weird because I'm literally in a recording studio, so I have no idea why that's happening.
Anyway, pick it up. So segmentation, carry on, Tracey.
Yeah, segmentation. So really, so your question was, you get all this information as a recruitment business owner or as a consultant. What do I do with it? Because really, all I want to do is go back to the client I filled with last week and fill with them again. So maybe then we're back to process. Maybe then that's a business owner, that's a business strategy conversation where they say, yeah, well, we need to actually do something different. So nobody's going to turn away business if I'm saying there's 50 vacancies that we don't have that AI and automation data are telling us that we can fill. We're not going to turn them away, but at the same time, we need to right size our process, our people, in order to fill them. But to the customer but you have to not create a false expectation, because again, we had a conversation one of the days there last week where a company was creating a demand, and they were kind of sending all this information out to candidates to say, we have jobs for you, and the candidates were all coming back saying, yeah, that's great. They didn't have anybody to then further take those candidates further down the pipeline, and that's a strategy question. So that goes back to business owners, and again, I'm often fond of saying, at the heart of it all, it is quite recruitment is not a complex, I don't know, job really. I think sometimes we try to overcomplicate it. We try to throw too much into the mix.
Yep.
And I think maybe sometimes less is more.
100%. I think this goes back to the point you made earlier. I think we both sort of made, is that it's when you get that level of information, who's the best person or the best resource to deal with it. Is it additional
Yep.
automation? Is it marketing? Is it sales? Is it someone who's a data person in your organization? It's not everything ends up on the desk of the consultant. So I think there is some strategy and structural conversation around the work that data creates, as well as the efficiencies it also creates. It also creates other work that probably is not best done.
Yep.
I wanted to maybe put this all into some sort of practical context, because, and unashamedly pitching, but the Data Edge product that you've put together is born out of your experience of where agencies get the most value from this data overhaul and review, and you've broken it down into parts. And I just
Yep.
wanted to touch on those because I think ultimately this is a very simple way and practical way for businesses to get their data in a way that starts to enable them more. And I know that you've broken it down, but the
Yep.
first one is all about fixing the foundations in the business. Can you talk to that point and tell me all about that? Tell the people listening about that. Why is it important?
So it really sort of underscores everything. In order for your any of this to work, you have to have good data underpinning it all. Now, no database is perfect. It just needs to be usable. So you just need to have enough to do what you need to do with it. Because I think sometimes organizations make a cottage industry out of data quality, and they try and clean everything, and they put people into all of this, to cleaning all the data. But what I think is better is if you, again, stay close to the money. So go and find all of the companies that you've placed with in the past 2 years. Make sure that there are no duplications within the companies, because again, one thing that I see a lot is CRMs are often known as the single source of truth. But if you then go to match your companies in your CRM with the companies in your finance system, most of the time they don't match by name, and so on. So we need to sort of think about how data flows through all the organizations, because if they sit in separate systems, we don't want it all to be siloed. So the ideal is that we want a single customer view. So in terms of data quality, it's go back to your last number of placements, have a look to see what the duplication rate is like within your candidates. One really interesting one for me is always email addresses. So people think that they've got 2,000 contacts on a mailing email communication, we should say, and then I say, well, you don't really have 2,000 because 500 of them don't have email addresses. They're dots and TBCs. Another 500 of them are unsubscribed, and another 300 of them are bouncing. So I don't know what my mental maths are, but I think that left me with about 700 people out of a list that was originally 2,000. So start, really fix the foundations, from, look at the quality of your data. And again, this is where people start to glaze over. It doesn't have to be manual. It doesn't have to be complicated. There are lots of tools out there that, will do all of this for you in terms of, updating your data. But the reason that it's important is if you think about, up to this point, you were sending out email communications in some sort of a manual way. Then you put an automation on top of it. Steve, who was an accounts assistant in London in 2014, is now a finance director in Sydney, in 2026. If you don't get your data right, Steve, who potentially is a contact in your Sydney office, as well as a potential senior candidate, is still getting jobs about being an accounts assistant in London. So in a really practical sense, that's where having your data correct is really important, because, and again, it's all back to the customer, being your candidate and your client. If you're not building trust, you're eroding trust. So you want to always make sure, that candidates, applicants want you to know them. They don't want to feel like they're just a number. And I think again, back to segmentation, I think it's really important, and that's where the data quality piece comes in. You need to have really good foundations.
Right. So number one's patience, and number two's follow the money. Or, which I know everyone's going to go, yeah, absolutely. But how do you define that in terms of
Yeah.
data?
Yeah, so and this actually goes back to a part of a question you asked me earlier on that I talked about revenue concentration and I talked about churn, but the third piece that was really important is the RFM analysis, which is what I do a lot as well. So I look at client spend, and this is about who your best client is, not just the person who spent the most with you. So who has spent with you most recently, which is the R, who has spent with you most frequently, which is the F, and then M is the monetary value. So instead of looking at your 100 clients in the past year and saying, here are the top 20 that have spent most with me, we're also bringing into that mix who spent with me most recently, who spent with me most frequently, and then we run that and give them a score. And this is where your best, the clients who spend most with you may not be your best clients because they may take ages, they may need, 6 rounds of interviews for every role. They might have, the friction, there might be a lot of friction. They might be really slow payers. They may not be your best clients. So I think a lot of it around that commercial piece is really interesting for people.
And it's the area everyone's most interested in, right? How do you monetize it? But so 1, fix your foundations, 2, follow the money, and 3 is clear the bottleneck. Talk about how you clear the bottlenecks.
Yeah, clear the bottlenecks. That's all back to process then. So that's what we're looking at in terms of, what pieces of this process can we automate? What pieces of this process can we run AI over? How can we get your consultants to be more productive, more efficient? How do we get them out of their inboxes and onto talking with people? How do we get them off, the jobs boards and so on. Again, I had a client recently who they spent all of their time basically filtering through applications. Their applications were just going straight into their inboxes rather than going onto their system. There was no any sort of systematic way of knowing whether Mary had applied 4 times in the past week because they just had to keep looking in the inbox. Whereas if you put them, sorry, need to pause for a second. If you have some sort of an AI or an automated process that runs all of those applicants into your CRM, and it can tell you, yes, this person's already applied. You can filter them against a particular role. They might be ready for a role now. They might not be ready for a role. Might not be right for this role, or they may not be relevant at all. But people don't need to spend the time filtering through CVs.
Right.
In a first round. I think one of the things that people are scared of around AI comes back to that ethical piece around we don't want to screen anybody out. Whereas I would always say, but flip it on its head, what you want to do is start screening the better people in. So you might get round to everybody eventually. It's not that you're going to, everybody's applying for roles and they don't even make it through the gate. But what you want to do as a consultant, because what you're trying to do is make money and fill jobs, is you want to get to the relevant people fastest.
Yeah, and that's
So I think there's a whole piece around ethics, but I think let's look at that through the right lens.
Yeah, and I think that's the point. When I was right at the start of the conversation, I was talking about that experience yesterday. That is exactly it. They have AIs built a bottleneck. They had a bottleneck. They fixed that bottleneck and they created a bigger one, right? And ultimately, They need to look at their strategy, structure, and process. And again, I mean this in the kindest possible way. There's not many candidates I know that can't wait for their next conversation with a recruiter. They love them when there's a vacancy that they might want, but outside of that, they're not that. Again, the research we've done says that a majority of people are very happy to have a first round screen with some sort of AI interface, which allows them to express themselves and don't feel like they're being sold to, but actually are able to state their case. So I think there's increasingly an argument for making sure you don't create bottlenecks and get them out of the way. And the fourth step of Data Edge is create your blueprint. And I think this is really important. So I'd love you to expand on that.
So that's really all about understanding what your secret sauce is, and your secret sauce, and it's the people that you have and the relationships that they have. So it's very much making sure that people have all the information they need to do their job correctly. I mean, we're talking there about what we can do then if you iterate further and you do buy the shiny toys and tools. I mean, it can do some really interesting things. What everybody wants is, we want to make sure that our new joiners are up to billing speed, up to billing as quickly as possible, right? So you can buy AI and technology that can literally say the very next best thing that you can do today is call this candidate or call this client. And we were talking the other day about the fact that a lot of people don't work in the office beside each other anymore. It used to be that new joiners learned from the people beside them. Oftentimes that doesn't happen now, because a lot of people are working from home and they don't have the manager listening into the call, or they don't have their more senior peers sitting beside them saying, get back on the phone, you forgot to ask them what their notice period was. But AI can perform that role in a lot of different ways. If we think about the data side of things, from a predictive point of view, again, the next best action, but it's all around, am I likely to fill this role or not? Is this an A job, a B job, or a C job? Where should I put my effort? Back to my example around looking at the KPIs in context, looking at your ratios, and all of that data. So I think every agency has a different, we're all doing the same job, but we all have a slightly different way of doing it. So it's really to find out how you do it. We don't want to lose any of that, secret sauce, because that's what your USP is. But we just, and at the end of the day, you want to beat the competition. We need to tell you how you can do that, but how you're not throwing good money after bad by buying new tech and tools before you have the first three bits sorted out.
Yeah, and as you know, I mean, this is the area you and I work in partnership, where I spend a lot of time in this particular layer of the data edge framework. And that is the structure, the strategy, the deployment of resources, the cost of those resources, the efficiencies you can gain from doing this right. Because although this is a whole probably separate podcast, the analysis from people like McKinsey is that the transactional value for a staffing agency is going to fall, because unless you're deeply specialized or unless you own the outcome. And by that, I mean you're providing like a statement of works type solution on the contracting side, or you have a retained sort of outsourced agreement, almost like an RPO on the perm side. But the transactional churn part of recruitment, which the majority of firms, they become marginalized by clients also having access to the same or better AI, right?
Yeah.
So this makes all of this even more important, that if you understand and you apply the data edge process through the 4 steps and you create a blueprint that's aligned to the market you're trying to serve in a way they want to buy that service, then you're more likely to be successful on a sustainable basis, rather than I'm just going to pump out a load more stuff in the middle because you're just going to get run over. There is no real future in just being a CV processing bureau in the middle, which is why recruitment is not complex, because there's no value. And clients will either pay you less to do that, or they won't need you to do that at all. And so the outcome here, this blueprint piece, is really important, not just beyond the here and now, but take the data and say, well, what is it telling me about where I need to redirect? Where do I need to establish a better foothold in a market so my business has a future?
And the only thing, what I would say is, the only thing that you have other than your people, sorry, there are two things. So you have your people, but the only other thing that differentiates you from your competitor is your database, because your competitor doesn't have the same contacts as you, doesn't have the same candidates as you, doesn't have the same notes of all of the relationships and all of the, the rich data and all of those conversations that you've had with people over the years, that your consultants have had with people over the years. Nobody can replicate that. Is yours. That is actually your USP. And I've just written something down here because I just thought it might be worthwhile saying this. So an article you sent me, Steve, actually recently said, in terms of data readiness, for RSM UK, the number one due diligence requirement is data readiness. And what they're saying is that data needs to be accurate, complete, connected, current, legally usable, and actively used. And then that is where your database actually becomes a data asset. And that is valuable,
Right.
So it's not just back to the very first, piece of the conversation. People glaze over when they talk about data. You realize that data, your database, is an asset of your organization, and potentially a saleable asset of your
Right.
organization. Then it becomes a lot more interesting.
Yeah, 100%. It's a really interesting take on something we possibly should have touched on more about the critical nature of data as a valuable asset. I would also say, because I know lots of lawyers and accountants that work in, buy and sell transactions in the world of recruitment, globally, if your data's not right, it's also a liability. And that is that they will exploit that at the table. So in the past, it was all about your EBIT only. But now, valuations of businesses and what multipliers people pay or are prepared to pay is heavily influenced by data and all the things you just listed out. So even if the idea of fixing your foundations seems all a bit dull and unpalatable to you as an owner, founder, director, but you've got ambitions to sell your business, you have to get over it, right? You have to get this right, because if it doesn't catch up with you during the operational phase of your business, it's going to catch up with you the day you think you're going to get a big check from someone for your recruitment company. So one way or the other, you have to embrace the idea you've got to fix it and make data something that is an asset and not, a dusty relic. Again, if you're a company with hundreds of thousands of records, apart from GDPR, my suggestion would be you need to clean it up, because you're not going to get credit for that. It's not a vanity measure that the more records I've got, the better my data. It's in fact the opposite way around. So it is absolutely a brilliant point to end on. Tracey, thank you again. It's fun. You and I, I'm a new data nerd. I'm a convert, but we could talk about the importance of this. And for someone like me, if anyone who knows me is listening or watching, the fact that I'm so enthusiastic about data and not all these crazy other ideas I have about how to blow up your business, that should convince you that this is somewhere you should spend your time, because Tracey certainly converted me to the commercial benefits and, and just, even with AI, get excited about it, but get your data done first. Otherwise, I'm proof positive that if you get it stuck into data, you can make a massive difference to your business for very little investment. Catch up with Tracey, go to our website, click on the link to Data Edge, get in touch with Tracey, check it out, have a chat. But, it's definitely worth a few minutes of your time to check it out. It's transformational for your business, and that's before you go and buy all the shiny new stuff. So, Tracey, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What my favorite part of my job is, it's exactly that. It's when I go in and talk to people at all levels in organizations about data, and then suddenly they just get that aha moment, and then they're coming to me saying, tell me more about the data. And that's the bit that, that I really love. So I'm creating a whole nation of data nerds like me, Steve.
I look forward to being part of it. Thanks, Trace. I'll catch up with you later on. Thanks, everyone.